She stands fragile, surrounded by the darkest of memories. It's 1996, South Africa, and she's given an account of the murder of her son. And present are the people who gave that order and carried it out. And as she finishes, the room falls deafeningly silent. And then Desmond Tutu says, "Do you have anything to say to these people?" And she says, "My heart is full of sorrow. I am asking you now to come with me to the place where he died and hold in your hand some of the earth of where he died with me and feel my pain and my loss. And then I want you to do something else. I have so much love to give, but now it has nowhere to go. So I want you to become my son and love me and allow me to love you." And he did. Restorative justice is fundamentally a call to change, to community, and to responsibility. It allows victims of harm and crime to have a voice that they would not longer have. I got into restorative justice before I even knew the word. Very briefly, my background is that I was manager of the centre just across the way there. The whole idea there was to build bridges between Protestants and Catholics and evangelicals and traditionalists. That journey took me to Belfast regularly, to the Coromia community, to learn what they were doing there, to build bridges and healing. It then took me on a journey that was unexpected and controversial. Word seems to follow me around quite a bit. And so for the first time in the Channel Islands, I organised a multi-faith conference about coexistence. And this sounds a bit like a joke, I'll give you, but we had an imam, a rabbi, and a priest. A rabbi from New York, an imam who had converted from Christianity to Islam, and a priest that I later would travel to Palestine with. And in those conversations, we started to build bridges and to celebrate what we had in common. In 2008, the priest decided it was a good idea that I go to what they call the occupied territories, to Israel, Palestine. And I could give a whole TEDx talk on that in itself. But who we met there were people who were committed to building bridges and reconciliation between Israelis and Palestinians. And what they used was a process called restorative justice. I remember one day sitting with a young man, an Israeli, who had committed his life to a charity called Ikhad, which is where people get alongside people whose homes have been bulldozed. And I said, "Persuade me that restorative justice works." And so he told me a story. He said there was one morning, a Palestinian mother was taking a 6-year-old boy to school, as anyone with a 6-year-old has done here in Guernsey. And she was holding his hand. Out of nowhere, there was a mortar strike, and so shrapnel everywhere, and they hit the deck. When it cleared, the mother, still holding her boy's hand, stood up, and it was just his arm. The boy survived, and months later, this charity arranged a meeting between the soldier who ordered the firing and the mother of the child. And after 2 hours, he said, they embraced and they forgave each other. That was the power of restorative justice. I came back to Guernsey, been to Africa a couple of times and been very moved by the whole issue of coming back to a very wealthy, affluent community from abject poverty. I came back from a war zone where it was common that actually 17, 18, 19-year-old kids had M16s with their finger on the trigger. That's what it's like. Lots of people have got opinions on Israel-Palestine. Not many people have been and smelt it and breathed it. But I was convinced that actually, do you know what? I want to commit myself to something that's more like that. So, me being me, I decided that I would go for a probation officer's job, thinking that would be the obvious thing. I was turned down, I failed miserably. And again, being me, I wanted more than just the HR, I'm sorry, sir, you weren't successful this time. So I went in to see Stuart Crisp, battered the door down, and said, what was it? Anyway, he gave me a good enough reason, but he said, there's something coming up in a few months that I think you'd be great at. And the island, in its wisdom, had decided, having been using restorative practices for a number of years, that they needed someone to pull it all together, to manage it, develop it, and implement it. And so I applied for this job and was successful. And the journey since then, 7 years later, has been quite remarkable. Primarily, we work in the criminal justice system. That's where I started. I had to write a strategy. I played rugby and did art, fine art. What a strategy was to me, I had no idea. So that was great. Finally got one together. One of the areas and one of the things about today's talk is about cultural change. Now, we live in a society that says it wants everything immediately now and present. And if we can't get a result now and evidence-base it and all that kind of stuff, we're not interested. Cultural change takes time. It takes years. And one of the great examples using restorative approaches, restorative practice, is the prison here on Guernsey. This particular image is from a young man who was working on a photography exhibition. This is a photograph that he took in the prison, and he titled it Trust. You can imagine how many people work in the kitchen in prison, some for violent crimes, and they're allowed to use knives. Titled Trust. Some of the work that we do there is, initially it was victim-offender meetings, whereby probation service, what they would do is anybody who had a client there that there was a clear and identifiable victim, what they would do is talk to that person about the use of a restorative approach and perhaps meeting with their victim to allow the victim to have a voice. Because let's face it, in our criminal justice system here, if you've been harmed in any way, you may sit in the public gallery, you're the most affected but the least involved in that process. What restorative justice does is give victims a voice and allow you some answers as to why and what happened and how it's impacted your life. And so what we've had are some really successful meetings between prisoners who have had their victims come into the prison in a safe environment to talk about what's happened. As far as I am aware, every single perpetrator that has then been released has not gone back to prison. And the victim has been allowed to express how they've been affected, how they feel, and move on. And that, in essence, is what restorative justice at that end of the continuum is. It's giving victims a voice and a chance to have their life back. I might add that it's actually not a panacea. And you're all sat there thinking, if this is a cure-all. There is, within the world of restorative practice, there are what I call some psychopathic optimists who think that, world peace will break out if we adopt restorative approaches. That's not the case. But where people engage for all the right reasons, there's amazing preparation before you put two people in a room together. I think the longest case that I've had in this island was a year of preparation before bringing people together where you knew they'd be in a safe environment. One of the most wonderful, I travelled to Cardiff quite a bit when I first was to work in their HMP there, and I was privileged to be involved in a restorative meeting whereby a guy was driving home one night and he'd got his mobile phone, and as we've all done, was driving away, dropped his mobile phone, and as he went to pick it up, he mounted the curb and hit a man. And the man ended up on a life support machine. And there came the day that his wife had to make the decision whether or not to turn the machine off. And they had to pull his 6-year-old boy off him. And his wife said, I want to know about the man who did this. And what she couldn't know and didn't know was that he was suicidal. It was a tragic, tragic accident. What victim support in Cardiff did was arrange a meeting for them to come face to face and to talk about what had happened, to talk about the impact. And at the end of an hour-and-a-half meeting, she walked around the table, hugged the man and said, enough people have died already. This is a really powerful process. when people engage with it for the right reasons. And I'm proud to lead it in Guernsey, and I'm proud of a lot of the stuff we're doing in the criminal justice system. We have a robust strategic framework put in place so that we can allow this kind of healing that the criminal justice just by itself does not provide. One of the really exciting things that I'm allowed to do is to work creatively in community as well, because there's a whole continuum of restorative approaches and restorative practice, because it's about what does healthy community look like? What do we look like at our best? You know, Mark's already talked about this being the best place to live by 2020. Restorative practice would be a huge foundational, integral part of that, making it happen. One of the wonderful things that we do is work with the Arts Commission. I know Lottie and her team are here today. And this was one of the most exciting projects recently that we did with local artist Hugh Rose. And the challenge was, it was all on the back of the Banksy-esque Gollop that appeared down at the old TEDxStPeterPort school. And, you know, the palaver, oh my goodness, you know, terrible stuff that people should actually paint on walls. So we thought what we would do is address this in a creative, restorative way. So we got together a bunch of, shall we say, spirited young people from one of the estates, who most people had given up on working creatively with and addressing their kind of responsibilities. And what we thought would be a great idea was to address the whole issue of morals and values. And so we went out and looked at the goal thing, and then I always remember that he was giving a talk on street art and graffiti. And he's done this many occasions, but never with a bunch of people with Asperger's and ADHD. We got them in this classroom, and they were all on, you know, the chairs that have wheels? Because they can't sit still. And what was happening was these kids were flying around the room at all angles, while poor Hugh was trying to deliver this talk on street art. And he kept looking at me as if saying, what is going on? And I'd say, no, they're here, they've not legged it, you're all right, keep going. And come the end of it, what we did then, it was fantastic, asking loads of good questions. And then what we did, within the big sports hall, we got loads of what I just said were words. And they're actually values and morals. And I said, pick 3 that are important to you. And so some just grabbed the first 3 they could. Some spent ages there, and others were playing basketball. But basically what happened, we got them, and I was actually quite nervous about this, because, you know, circle times are great things. But they're very difficult for people who can't sit still for 5 minutes. I'm struggling to actually stand in this red spot as we speak. But what we managed to do, as I said, pick the one that's most important to you. And these words on the top are the words that they chose. And the one I just want to briefly talk about was the one that says flexibility. And we came to this young girl, and I said, what is it about that word that's important to you? And she said, Mum says that we have to be flexible because Gran's forgetting who we are, and we have to be flexible for her. Now, these were kids that people had given up on in our local community. And after a morning with us, with the commissions, they were producing work like that. What Hugh did then in the afternoon was to translate what those words might look like with animals. And this is what they produced. And it's about that size. A fantastic opportunity to work creatively with young people, to challenge them on what it means to be a human being that can contribute to society in a healthy way, to not stigmatize them just because of where they're from, but to work with them and help them grow. Very quickly, because I'm running out of time. But another thing, Company Chameleon came over, and what we did again was creatively try and engage with young people. We got a bunch of lads and girls from the Genet estate who'd never seen a dance. They performed this 15-minute piece called Push, which was all about aggression and conflict. And it was amazing to see these young people who clearly had not seen a dance before and their reaction to them. And what we got them to do afterwards was to talk about how they thought that they were feeling in the dance, and then how it made them feel. And it just proves to me this is one of the reasons why we need artists, because they express the inexpressible. They speak a language that we perhaps don't speak ourselves, but we do understand. And that's why we connect so deeply with them. And that's why the young people on that day connected so deeply with this. We didn't even know if some of them were going to stay, you know, as we started. But by the end of it, they were producing these wonderful works of art, expressing through, I remember one of them there was loads of sort of stars in their heart because it was all pop, 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 and they were so excited by what they'd seen. again, showing the transformation that's possible. I think sometimes it can all seem rather overwhelming and not possible. But for me, the restorative practice and approach has been made possible because in every area that I work, there's a group of champions. There's a group of people who say, I believe in this, and I want to make a difference. And you people are those people who can make a difference. I know Paula is up there from La Rondan, and she has committed a way of being in that school over the past 6 or 7 years that has transformed the way that those young people behave and how they deal with the problems and conflicts that occur. So Margaret's right. It's the only thing that ever has. I want to finish with just one story, and I'm going to read it. I've been given permission to use this, from a mother of a girl who we worked with quite a number of years ago now. And she said this: during the 4 months our daughter was bullied, she went from being a bubbly, happy girl to a shadow of herself. She was unable to eat or sleep properly, and one day refused to go to school as she could no longer cope. She cried a lot, stopped smiling, and became socially isolated. Her grades dropped, and at one point we considered possible referrals. The RJ was an absolute godsend, the restorative justice meeting. It gave us our daughter back, but more importantly, it gave her hope. The young people involved accepted responsibility for their actions, and finally the whole nasty business came to an end. Our girl finally had her life back, and in no time at all she was smiling and back out with her friends. Her grades improved, and she was happier to go to school. So once again, many thanks for all the wonderful efforts of your team, and I definitely will be spreading the word on restorative practice and just how much of an impact it can have. Thank you.